Good morning, everyone. I think you can all hear me. I can hear me. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I would also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and welcome all those celebrating the Jewish festival of Shavuot, which is today, and also those celebrating the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which began last weekend. And to all, good morning and welcome. My name is Jonathan Kolieb. I'm a lecturer in law from the Graduate School of Business and Law here at RMIT. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, on his first day on the job, 1st of January this year, said, "On my first day as Secretary-General of the UN, one question weighs heavily upon my heart. How can we help the millions of people caught up in conflict, suffering massively in wars with no end in sight? Civilians are pounded with deadly force, women, children and men are killed and injured, forced from their homes, dispossessed and destitute. Even hospitals and aid convoys are targeted. No one wins these wars, everyone loses. Trillions of dollars are spent destroying societies and economies, fueling cycles of mistrust and fear that can last for generations. Whole regions are destabilised, and the new threat of global terrorism affects us all. Let us resolve to put peace first. Let us make 2017 a year in which we all, citizens, governments, leaders, strive to overcome our differences. From solidarity and compassion in our daily lives to dialogue and respect across our political divides. From ceasefires on the battlefield to compromise at the negotiating table. Peace must be our goal and our guide. All that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us. I appeal to you all to join me in committing to peace today and every day. Let us make 2017 a year for peace." So on that note, 5 months after that hopeful request, we meet here today with a little bit more work to do. Thank you all for coming to our event this morning, In Pursuit of Positive Peace. We hope and trust over the next few hours, the presentations and the conversation that will take place in this room will be informative, enlightening, and hopefully even inspirational. Today, we've brought together two world-class, world-leading peace-building organisations, the Institute for Economics and Peace and the Rotary Foundation. One, a relatively small, young think tank that is producing compelling research and advocacy on how to measure peace and how to quantify peace building and its benefits. Chief among those products is the Global Peace Index, the 2017 version of which will be launched tomorrow globally. The other organisation is a 100-year-old veteran in this field, a truly global network of over 1 million volunteers and professionals that embark on selfless projects around the world, including in the realms of peace building and sustainability. IEP and Rotary, the young, the old, the small, the large, each pursuing peace in their own way. Today we will hear and discuss their pursuits of positive peace with Mr. Alistair from the Chief Operating Officer of the Institute for Economics and Peace, and with Mr. Paul Netzel, the Chairman-elect of the Rotary Foundation. Welcome, gentlemen. I believe I speak on behalf of Alistair and Paul when I say that we really welcome a conversation. So there will be presentations from Alistair and Paul. There will be a facilitated conversation up here, facilitated by a Rotarian of good standing, Ms. Julie Mason. And then there will be plenty of time afterwards for us to broaden the conversation to you all as well. So please, any questions you have, write them down and save them for that Q&A. Okay, well, before we get to Alistair and Paul's presentations, we do have a few greetings. The first from the Deputy Dean of Global and Language Studies here at RMIT, my good friend, Associate Professor Paul Battersby.
Thank you, everybody, and on behalf of the School of Global, Urban and Social Studies and the College of Design and Social Context, and by implication RMIT University, although I can't claim to be a spokesperson for the entire university, a very warm welcome indeed to Mr. Alistair, COO of the Institute for Economics and Peace, and to Mr. Paul Netzel, President of the Global Rotary Foundation. Thank you for coming, and thank you for this invitation for me to come along and say a few words by way of introduction to this magnificent event. As Academic Director for the Centre for Global Research, and as the Deputy Dean for Global and Language Studies, I can safely declare that everyone associated with the study of all things global at RMIT feel very privileged indeed to be able to co-host such an important event. And I would like to thank Jonathan Kolieb, especially from the Graduate School of Business and Law, for staging this event. The Centre for Global Research is committed to a research agenda that explores the nature of peace and security, the sources of violence and the conditions that give rise to conflict. The Global and Language Studies discipline, which is a teaching discipline, impresses upon our students the importance of cultural understanding, the valuing of cultural diversity and of ethical practice, of humanity and respect for universal rights, all of which I would consider to be the cornerstones of a decent global society. We did this through our courses, our research, student research and staff academic research, and in partnership with the Australian Red Cross, who has become a significant partner in our project. We believe still, in this age of rampant hyper-commercialism, that academics and universities have a fundamental role to play in preventing a repeat of past human-engineered catastrophes. Peace between peoples is such a good idea. Why would anybody want to oppose it? But the preservation of peace is not just a matter of saving the world from erratic and egocentric megalomaniacs. Globalization is aberrant in its complexity, and global dynamics do not yield simple choices between binary opposites of order and disorder, control or chaos. The search for a more nuanced and contextualized understanding of global peace leads inescapably towards the analysis of those internal patterns of connection and disconnection that can give rise to global supply chains of violence, which is why the Global Peace Index is such an important addition to our, dare I say, armory of peace. Polarities between political interests and ideologies, geographical and societal inequalities generate uncertainties that defy prediction, but which can be catastrophic in their consequences. Globalization multiplies opportunities to connect, to cooperate, to challenge illegitimate power, but it also increases opportunities to do harm, to perpetuate violence, and to damage vital, complex ecosystems upon which people and peoples depend. Topographies of conflict signal breakdowns in political relations, which can be attributed to a long list of interrelated factors, some stemming from individual idiosyncrasies, but many from systemic failings. In the aftermath of the old Cold War, the political scientist Mary Carroll wrote presciently that a new generation of warfare was emerging in which wars are increasingly fought not between nations but within them, between the state and groups defined by a shared sense of cultural identity, collective grievance. In this crucible, crime becomes the means by which many political players can achieve a strategic advantage. And this pattern is perhaps most in evidence today in the collapse of Soviet power in Central Asia and the upsurge of drug-fueled political violence in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and elsewhere. But notions of a global underworld or a dark underside of globalization tend to focus our attention on only one dimension of global security or global peace. The world of illicit gangs, terrorist groups, rebels, money launderers, traffickers, and crime godfathers. Yet it's the lawful actors, the legally constituted actors, sovereign states or the governments thereof, private actors, companies, organizations, including humanitarian non-state organizations, in their daily routines, in their daily practice, straddle a sometimes difficult to define line between lawfulness and unlawfulness. So the focus of our attention needs to be not just upon the behaviour of the quote-unquote bad guys of globalisation, but also upon the behaviours of people who have a responsibility to do better. We live in a world of 206 nation-states, 7,756 intergovernmental organisations, 59,383 international non-government organisations, approximately 80,000 transnational corporations with some 800,000 affiliates. But this plurality does not guarantee peace. It is entirely possible to interpret events in the Middle East, the resurgence of Russia, and the escalation of political tensions in the South China Sea as marking a return to the power politics of old. Old verities about the nature of international order are being dusted off, and globalization is being consigned to history. The hawks are today muscling up. Global trade growth is slowing and globalization is on the nose. And this anti-globalization turn is partly a consequence of rising inequality in developed countries as much as developing countries that could have been checked and can be checked by reining in the excesses of global financialization. The post-World War II order is changing, must change, but no state, it seems, is intent upon destroying it for very practical reasons, so there are signs of hope. But this does not mean, of course, that conflict between the United States and China, or Russia for that matter, is impossible. Just ask Peter Navarro, the new head of the White House National Trade Council. His 2008 book, The Coming China Wars, should give cause for thought. Do we have a world on the brink of armed confrontation between superpowers? Possibly, more likely than it was a year ago. But should this be our sole focus? There's a long list of global risks that contribute to this global insecurity, which require urgent attention, which include nuclear proliferation, climate change, political violence in general, and gendered violence in particular, poverty, inequality, human exploitation, all of which are an affront to notions of a civilized society, and all of which are, indirectly or directly, planetary in scale. How people choose to respond to the upside and downside risks of globalization will in large part affect how globalization proceeds. Responses can be reflexive, that is, considered, grounded upon research, upon consensus, and appreciation of what has worked in the past and what has not. Or they can be reflex, they can be knee-jerk, based upon fear or greed, without any clear long-term planning or consideration for long-term consequences. There are choices to be made, important choices to be made about how this world is run, between informed and cooperative future planning or perpetual crisis management. In an age where globalization is becoming increasingly complex and unpredictable, aberrant, as I like to say, common sense would recommend the former. But planners need knowledge and information that can be readily applied to the planning process. This applies to the planning process for global peace. And this is where all sources of information, indices in particular, can be immensely useful. Because they can present information to time-poor decision makers in a very clear, very accessible form. And this time-saving device is actually of great value indeed in the planning process. So the Global Peace Index is undoubtedly a significant and welcome addition to global understanding, and an exciting and welcome advance on, I think, everybody in the room's efforts to try and foster a culture of global peace and awareness of the causes of insecurity, instability and violence, and therefore an awareness of strategies or means by which those global bads can be ameliorated or indeed eliminated from the world entirely, which would be a goal towards which I think we would all want to subscribe. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the School of Global, Urban and Social Studies for your support for this event. I hope you all enjoyed the RMIT screensavers. The founder and chairman of the Institute for Economics and Peace, Mr. Steve Kilauea, was hoping to be here this morning, but has been called away to London for the global launch of the Global Peace Index tomorrow. But he has recorded a greeting for us.
I apologise for not being in Melbourne at RMIT for this Positive Peace Conference. Originally I was going to speak, but as luck would have it, the UK election was called on the very day we're going to launch the Global Peace Index. So as I'm talking to you now, I'm prepping for tomorrow's launch of the 2017 Global Peace Index. And in it, we have two things which are covering on positive peace, which I think are of relevance to the politics of the day and also to the conference which you're having. The first is with the US. We can look at the ramifications going through the US from the distrust there is in the political establishment and with the system. When we look at positive peace, the US has had the third largest drop in positive peace any country in the world in the last decade. As we watch the areas where positive peace is formed in the US, we can see why this is playing out. In this year's report, we also cover populism in Europe. Although 3/4 of the world, countries in the world, have improved in positive peace, over half have decreased in positive peace in Europe. Then as we watch the rise of populism, we can trace it back to the very pillars which have decreased in Europe. So as we're looking at this, we'll be doing more work in this over the next few years. Finally, I hope you have a great day down there. I'm sure Alistair will do a great job. And I just really wish I was there and really enjoy yourselves very much.
That little prod from the boss. Let me call Mr. Alistair G up to the stand, to the lectern, to deliver a presentation about positive peace. Mr. Alistair G is the Chief Operating Officer of the Institute for Economics and Peace. Prior to joining IEP, Alistair was the CEO of Act for Peace for 11 years, during which time they raised over $100 million for peace and protection programs. Alistair has had a long career in the field of peace and conflict prevention. He has been the co-convener and treasurer of Make Poverty History, co-founder of the Centre for Armed Violence Reduction, chair of the Board of Consortium, founding chair of the Asia Pacific Centre for the Responsibility to Protect, amongst many other roles. Without further ado, Mr. Alistair G.
Before all that, I was a lawyer, and it's a while since I've been called to the stand, so it's a nice throwback to that era. Thank you very much, Jonathan, and to all our colleagues at RMIT, to Paul Netzel and all our Rotary colleagues here. I understand there's a lot of Rotarians. Can I have a show of hands just to see how many? Marvellous, about half of you. And to all others, it's a wonderful honour to be here, and I was quite proud of the 100 million that we had raised up until I started working more with Rotary, and compared to the billions that Paul and all of you at Rotary have raised over the last 100 years. So I want to acknowledge that, and looking forward to tonight's centenary dinner as well to do so. The agenda I'll run through over the next 20 minutes. Hang on, let's just get the clicker working. Do I need to point it somewhere, Jonathan? It was working 10 minutes ago. So there, try...
Point it at the hanger for the roof.
Oh, no. Alright, maybe I'll just go here. I'll start talking. Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks, yeah. No worries. All right, these are the 5 things I want to cover over the next 20 minutes, if I may. But first, we'll go back to a little bit about Steve. That's our starting point as an institute, and I think starting point of interest for many of you here. He's certainly grabbed the fascination of Rotary globally because he's an IT entrepreneur, a very successful IT entrepreneur who does have a long history in philanthropy. But one day, more than a decade ago, he was travelling through Africa and wondering what the most peaceful country on earth was. He was really sure he could work out what the most conflict or least peaceful country was, but he looked around and nowhere could he find out which were the most peaceful countries. So he set up the Global Peace Index, and from that the Institute for Economics and Peace has emerged. And over the last 10 years, driven by Steve's passion for this, he's achieved many amazing things, including the ability of the international community to agree to a global peace goal, which is Sustainable Development Goal number 16. It wasn't in the original Millennium Development Goals back in 2000 because everyone said peace wasn't measurable, peace wasn't the right thing to fit as part of a development platform, tracked globally, progressed systematically. And Steve and the Institute have set about proving them wrong, and now they have come to agree. So a large part of what we do now is helping countries to progress their levels of peace and to understand at different levels within society what that means and how to go about it. So within our research agenda, we do particularly peace indices from national level to subnational, where we look at levels of peace, we compare them in different societies, and that helps them learn who is progressing faster and what they need to do to catch up. We track levels of terrorism around the world and the main drivers of that. We track progress against the peace goal, and of course positive peace, for which we are becoming perhaps now best known, and through Steve's leadership, which looks at the attitudes, institutions and structures that enable peace, which I will come to. Just producing reports, as any university will tell you, is only half the role. Outreach is just as important. So with our media this year, we are hoping to achieve a media reach of over 4 billion people through our various releases. We are hoping to train over 1 million people in positive peace alone over the next 3 years, and we are trying to empower many thousands of people around the world to be able to take action. To our partnership with Rotary, this has been developing over a number of years. These photos here are from a workshop we did in Uganda with Rotaractors. They are Rotarians who are in their 20s, mainly, teaching them on the pillars of peace, and they then went out and developed programs that they can do in their own communities, which were on each of the pillars. And we do a number of these around the world. It's also contextualised with Rotarians and others based on the principles that are of interest and that resonate within those countries. This isn't a Western construct that we are dealing with. Here's another workshop we did with Rotarians. This one was last week in Mexico. Over 300 Mexicans flown in from around Mexico. The Rotary Foundation and Rotary clubs raised $130,000 for this program, which again trains people in positive peace and gets them to develop programs that they will go back and do through their Rotary clubs. It is a very exciting collaboration. These workshops are just one part of our partnership with Rotary. We also have 150 Rotarian Peace Fellows who are ambassadors that we work with. They go around giving presentations around the world, training people. We have, we're setting up a Positive Peace Academy. That'll be a key part of reaching 1 million people with Rotary that we'll be training over the next 3 years. Now, one of the things I'm particularly excited about working with Rotary is that it is full of business people, entrepreneurs, professionals, and that's the sort of approach, that different way of thinking about peace, which will be critical. And it's that sort of enduring passion that I see you've achieved with, for instance, the polio campaign, not giving up until the job is done, making sure it is done properly, which is exactly what peace needs. But more on that shortly. Let's go to what is peace, and this will be how we get to positive peace particularly. So traditionally peace was solely thought of in terms of levels of violence, and peace being the absence of violence and the fear of violence. Much as in health terms up until last 50, 100 years, people focused on illness as being the sign of health. But of course, if you want to know how to reduce your likelihood of getting sick, you also have to look at levels of fitness. And positive peace is the equivalent of that. It is looking at what is required, what exists in peaceful societies in order to create and sustain that peace. What is the difference between a peaceful society and not? So attitudes, institutions and structures that create and sustain peace is what we mean by positive peace. Some people think that by positive peace we mean that is the preferred term of peace rather than negative peace. That's not correct. It is looking at what exists in peaceful societies. So it's not an alternative definition of peace, but it is an essential element for it. So that's why we often don't use the term negative peace, we use the term actual peace. There's no ideal term for that. The expression positive peace has been around for over 50 years. Johann Galtung is the most famous person for developing the theory of it. What is different with our work is that we derive it empirically. So we, having developed the global peace index of what are the ranking, the levels of peace in every country around the world, well, we go to countries that make up 99.7% of the world's population. There's not enough data in the other 0.3% for us to make credible findings. And from that, we can determine, okay, what exists in the more peaceful countries compared to the least peaceful countries, and therefore what are the key drivers that can sustain that peace. When we look at peace over a period of time, and we have then come up with the key elements, and many of those overlap with the key areas of focus that Rotary has, which I will get to shortly. But first of all, let's just look a little bit at actual peace and the global peace index and what it finds. So we're now into its 11th year, and it is used globally. It's referred to in thousands of books. It's used in thousands of schools and university curricula. It's referred to by the UN, with whom we do a lot of work, and many people around the world as the authoritative study on levels of peace across every country. We have data that we bring in from lots of different official credible data sets to work this out. We have expert panels that oversee it. We work with independent groups such as the Economist Intelligence Unit to make sure it is objective, and that is how we form the basis of the findings that we make. And these are the 23 indicators that make up our assessments of every country. They are spread across these three domains, which are the ongoing domestic and international conflict, the levels of internal societal safety and security, and measures of militarisation. I'll skip through a lot of slides. There'll be plenty of time for questions to come back. All right, so what's happened over the last 10 years? Since the GFC, we've seen an overall deterioration in levels of peace, but that is not a consistent thing across every country by any means. There's actually been an improvement in more countries than there has been a deterioration. It's split pretty much down the middle. 52% of countries have improved in the last 10 years, 48% have deteriorated, but those deteriorations have been slightly bigger. In this year, this was from the 2016 Global Peace Index. There was a slight deterioration Sadly, I'm not allowed to say until tomorrow what the result is of the 2017, though it might surprise some people. So I'd encourage you to go onto the website, which goes live tomorrow afternoon about 2 p.m, and have a look at what has happened in 2017. Now let's just have a show of hands. Who thinks that the national average of peace has improved over the past year? There you go, about 5% of you. There you go, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Okay, so here are some trends over the past decade. One of the big improvements in terms of levels of peacefulness in countries has been the reduction of military expenditure. Interestingly, overall, had it not been for what's happened in a number of Middle Eastern countries, then overall global peace would have improved over the last 10 years. But we are hovering about the level that we were in 2010. There's been minor changes in that period, but that masks a lot of significant changes that have been happening across different domains and across different countries and regions. So currently the most peaceful region is Europe, and as I said, the least peaceful region is the Middle East, North Africa. One domain that has been improving that does surprise people is on political terror. Over the last 10 years, there's been 10 more countries improve their levels of political terror, that means reducing things like torture, than have decreased in that area. But there's been considerable movement up and down across many countries. So these, the series names don't show up there. Maybe if I push the button again, no? Okay, sorry, they show up on the printout. What you actually see is in terms of the biggest improvements, and that's the one at the top, is in levels of military expenditure, so reduction levels of military expenditure. The biggest decreases down the bottom, the biggest deterioration, has been battlefield deaths, number of refugees and displaced people, and impact of terrorism. So while last year the number of deaths from terrorism went down by 10%, it increased in many countries, and 23 countries had their highest ever levels of terrorist attacks and terror deaths. So we've actually seen an increase in the level of terrorism impact, which will come as no surprise to many people. So looking at peace at the national level, and there's a printout outside of a highlights of the Global Peace Index. It's a 4-page version. The actual version, which you can get online, is 130 odd pages. And this shows it in bands from green being the most peaceful through to red being the least peaceful. Generally the mix of peacefulness across each country. Now if you go onto our website, you can play around with every country there. You can compare countries. If you click on a country, it will show you exactly how they score across all those 23 indicators, what their economic value of peace is, and you'll be able to get a lot of, I think, useful information. For instance, Australia over the last 10 years has generally been in the teens, gone between 12 and 17. New Zealand is doing considerably better. They're a regular top 5. In terms of the other most peaceful countries, just quickly, Iceland has been at the top throughout. There's been a bit of movement otherwise in the top 10, and sadly there's been little movement in the bottom 5. Syria has been there for a number of years now. North Korea is just outside that list. Moving right along, and I wanted to go sub-national, particularly for Rotarians here, because a lot of your projects are at the district level or at the club level, and I picked Mexico because at the provincial level accords quite closely with the district structure in Mexico. And there has been considerable movement. Here we see the improvements in levels of peace in Mexico by district. So peace is not just at a national or regional, global level. A lot of it is determined at the subnational and provincial level. So that there's a lot that can be done through Rotary district programs and by civil society and government. So, for instance, our Mexico Peace Index, which looks at levels of peace across 31 Mexican states, is getting very good traction in many of those states. The governors are committing and giving us signed commitments as to wanting to improve their levels of peace. They're comparing themselves to neighbouring states and how they are improving. We're getting civil society getting involved and government looking at the driving factors and being held to account to improve the aspects of which they are falling behind in. And of course we go into great depth about what is behind all these aspects within each state. And just to prove it's not just Mexico, which you can go at provincial level, there's a provincial level of homicide across all of the Americas. Same is possible all around the world. And why stop at district level when we can go down to the municipality, which in Mexico, of course, largely with Rotary Club level. And you will see that the levels of peace and homicides are vastly different across different groups. So you can do so much at the municipal level, here we would call it local government. And I know we've got a number of people from the police here, and they would know that particularly well, that peace is very much a local issue. You'll often see in reports that 2% of the world's homicides, a majority of the world's homicides occur on 2% of city blocks. So with things like hotspot policing, understanding, tracking the data, you can significantly reduce homicides, which is a major factor of levels of peace. And you don't need sophisticated data to do this. The Melbourne equivalent in Colombia is a city called Kolieb. It's the largest southern city in Colombia, and a doctor there back in the 90s wanted to reduce the levels of homicide, and everyone told him, look, Colombia's in the middle of a civil war, you've got drug cartels running the place, that's what's determined by determining the homicide rates across the country. A doctor is not going to be able to do much about that. And what he did, he set up a giant map in his office. He was admittedly elected mayor at this time, and put pins in it, colour-coded pins, to show, to work out where the deaths were occurring and at what times. And you could see some of the drivers from that, such as it was happening on nights when people were being paid and then going to the pub and having in places where they had easy access to weapons. And he was able to, from that data-driven approach, measuring the homicides, working out when and why they were occurring, that they were able to reduce their homicides by more than 50%. Is that 5 minutes to go? All right, I should probably start positive peace then. Okay, so as I said before, we were able to work out from the most peaceful countries in the world what the key factors were in creating and sustaining levels of peace. And these are the top 8. They're not the only things that matter. These are statistically the most consequential factors. Well-functioning government, equitable distribution of resources, free flow of information, good relations with neighbours, high levels of human capital, which accords well with the education focus of Rotary, acceptance of the rights of others, low levels of corruption, and sound business environment. That accords well with the economic community development focus of Rotary. And I'll go into a bit later the benefits of pursuing these. Okay, so how do we construct the positive peace index then? Well, it's made up of those 8 factors, and we break that down into 24 indicators. Again, we use credible data sets to be able to track that. We gather data that gives us a consistent picture across 162 countries. We have expert panels that assess this, We've been developing it over many years. And this tells us globally what's been deteriorating most and what's been improving the most. So at the top there you have one of the indicators of the freedom of information, and free flow of information, and freedom of the press. At the bottom you have some other indicators that enable a greater flow of information. Steve mentioned before about changes in positive peace in the US and half of Europe, the deteriorations that have happened there. And the US has had the 4th largest drop in positive peace over the past decade. And a lot of that has been from reductions in free flow of information, freedom of the press. And this is, much of this data is before the Trump era. We're not talking about, in these particular findings, press being locked out of briefings from Sean Spicer. We're talking about lockdowns, and the report goes into exactly what it is we are looking at here and how we've arrived at those findings. We've also seen a significant deterioration in the US and half of Europe in perceptions of levels of corruption, which I'm happy to take questions on that, but given the time I better move on quickly. So positive peace at the national level, we've found that 73% of countries have improved over the past decade, and overall that's led to a 1.6% improvement in positive peace. The most positive peaceful countries are Denmark, Finland and Sweden, and the least positive peaceful countries are Afghanistan, Central African Republic and Somalia. And again, when looking at positive peace, it's not just what's happening at the national level. We can go sub-national, using the example of Mexico again, something we track and enable groups in these provinces to be able to take action on, and enable governments and the media to understand and progress. So what are some of the benefits that positive peace gives to countries? Well, one of them is resilience. You see here that countries with high positive peace are more resistant to shocks and to change in their global peace score. So those with medium and low have seen significant movement, some improvement, but a lot of them have been a deterioration compared to those which have high positive peace to start off with. Now here's a fairly scary graph, but it's actually one, if you can see it up close, is very interesting. What it shows up the vertical axis is levels of positive peace, and the bottom axis, the internal peace component of the global peace index. And what you see is you've got down here the countries with high positive peace generally, as I said, have small changes in their levels of peacefulness, whereas up high is particularly volatile. And a lot of them have gone bad in terms of deterioration levels of peace very quickly. So you've got Syria is the biggest mover up the top. And as I say, if you go online to look at the report, you can see which countries these are and just the level of movement. So one thing you see is that you can make significant changes in terms of your actual peace very quickly, but it takes longer to build positive peace. So there's more horizontal movement than there is vertical movement, which would show a rapid change in positive peace. And this is significant because it shows countries that have very different levels of positive peace to where their actual peace is. So the ones underneath the line have a surplus of positive peace, and their positive peace is better, and you would expect them to be able to make significant gains in their levels of actual peace. The ones above the line are at greater risk of dropping back because their positive peace is lower, and therefore we've seen countries in that situation before at greater risk of moving into conflict and suffering from shocks. And these are some of the shocks that you might face in a low positive peace country. You're much more at risk of facing a violent resistance movement in that situation. People feel that their grievances cannot be addressed unless they turn to violence. So 91% of violent resistance movements have been in low positive peace countries over the past decade. And 84% of political shocks, things like coups, have been in low positive peace environments. Positive peace also has a significant determination on your economic growth. So countries which have been improving their levels of positive peace have over the past 10 years seen significant higher growth in GDP than other countries. And also those with improving positive peace have performed much better on global goals, such as the Millennium Development Goals, and we expect that to be reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals as well. Now, there are some things in terms of the factors of positive peace that matter throughout the process. And here you see, for instance, corruption is particularly significant, and you will see that there is a tipping point. When you look at these factors of positive peace in a system, you'll see you don't just improve one area to make a difference. It operates in that if you are improving all of them, you can change the way that you are transitioning to peace in your society. And as you transition, you reach a point with some of these issues where things can accelerate. So here we can see that for corruption, and here we can see it for economic development, where you improve those, you can accelerate significantly towards peace, and peace will accelerate you achieving those improvements. As I mentioned, it is a systems approach that is needed and that we have been studying. For the lowest positive peace countries, the factors that matter most are well-functioning government, the acceptance of the rights of others, the relations with neighbours, and the levels of corruption. As you move into a more mid to high levels of positive peace, the other factors of sound business and free flow of information become more significant. I better move on quickly because I've been told I've got 1 minute left and still got 500 slides. The positive peace is transformational. I mentioned some of the benefits of when all pillars are strong, so you need to look at which are behind in a particular society in order to improve them. And once you are following the system, the benefits are mutually reinforcing. You get into a virtuous cycle. As your positive peace improves, that will enable alternative forms of grievances to be resolved. That will mean lower violence. Lower violence means lower cost, and therefore you have more money to invest in both further improving your levels of positive peace and further reducing violence through direct violence reduction programs. If you're not following this system, you get into a vicious cycle, costs escalate, which we'll see in a moment in the next section. For instance, the cost of violence for low-level peace countries is on average 37% of GDP, whereas only 3% of GDP for countries with high levels of peace. Okay, final section, and this is about achieving the economic value of peace. The economic cost of violence is enormous. It is around 13% of world GDP, nearly over $13 trillion. That is both alarming, but it also opens up opportunities. And this is one of the reasons before I was saying it's exciting to be working with Rotarians, business-minded people who can see how to convert that cost into savings and not just take an aid-driven approach, but an approach where resources can be gathered locally because there can be savings locally at a national level down to a community level of reducing those costs of violence and turning them into investments into peace. Just quickly then, this is a breakdown of that $13 trillion. It differs by region. You've got a very high proportion of military expenditure in regions like North America, whereas when you go to the Latin Americas, a huge proportion of it is in homicide and violent crime. That's borne not just by governments and obviously people, but also by businesses. That's why businesses in many of your Rotary clubs are particularly interested in wanting to be part of the solution for improving peace. And we're working with many of them. For instance, we had a presentation with the Mexican Chamber of Commerce last week, and are dealing with them ongoing as we are with many other chambers of commerce. So again, just highlighted the lower expenditure and how that can be used to invest in peace. In developed countries, we're starting to do that with things like recidivism impact bonds. I don't know if anyone's heard of this, where rather than just putting up with the cost of people going back to prison, governments are increasingly entering into financial instruments where if those crimes can be prevented, then they will be able to refund those programs because it saves them on the costs of penitentiary or the costs of police. And so using this model of the economic value of peace, and we're trying to take that into developing countries as well, often based more on the principles, and so we're dealing with groups like the Rotary Action Group on Business and Entrepreneurship. They're discussing with us on how they can perhaps broker groups to come together, government cost bearers and groups that can reduce their costs of violence and fund programs that will achieve peace. So I mentioned before, this is my final slide, that on our website there is all this information, and particularly tomorrow when we launch the Global Peace Index, I hope you'll go and see on it and find some information that you find useful for action, and that we'd be delighted to talk to you about how we can help you to pursue peace, because there is something we can all do, either individually or collective, to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alistair, for that presentation. May I quickly move on to invite Mr. Paul Netzel up to the lectern to offer some remarks as well in response to Alistair's presentation, but also as the incoming chair of the Rotary Foundation, to share a few remarks about what the Rotary Foundation does in the pursuit of positive peace. Paul Netzel is a member of the Rotary Club of Los Angeles, and as I mentioned, he is the incoming chair, or the chairman-elect, for 2017-18 of the Worldwide Rotary Foundation. I think over the past 100 years, that foundation has contributed over $3 billion worth, raised $3 billion worth of funds that have gone to humanitarian projects around the world. Paul is a founder and chair of a management consulting firm specialising in work with non-profit organisations. He has served as a local mayor in Culver City, California. Lots of great vegetarian restaurants there, it's a place I like to hang out. And president of Culver City's Board of Education. He has held leadership positions in numerous local and national professional societies and not-for-profit boards. Without further ado, Mr. Paul Netzel.
Good day, everybody. Well, I'll tell you, first of all, thank you, Jonathan, for that very kind introduction. And I was going to say, Alistair, you know, I was just about ready to cede my time to you. I really appreciate very much what you had to say, and I think, frankly, you really provide the crux of what we're about here, first of all, to get a handle around what positive peace is all about. And we Rotarians, by and large, frankly, are still on a very steep learning slope, and I'm right there as well. And so it really is great to see you and welcome you, and it's great to partner with you and going forward with you and Steve, frankly. And we appreciate that a lot. Now, you mentioned that coming out, this might be a coming out party, by the way, I might mention. tomorrow at 2 p.m. See, I called my daughter and wife this morning about 6 a.m. our time here, and they asked me what day it is, and I said, well, it's tomorrow, it's Wednesday. And they said, well, it's Tuesday there. So when you said 2 p.m. tomorrow, did you mean tomorrow their time or tomorrow our time? 2 p.m. I'm just kidding. All right. How many are Rotary related? I'm curious, did you see Rotary related versus how many are not really Rotary related in the audience? That's interesting. Probably I'd say about 2/3 are not Rotary related. So in that case, then I will offer a few thoughts that might give you a little sense of what Rotary is about. It's impossible in the time allotted, as you found out, to talk adequately about what Rotary really does, but can give you perhaps some flavor of what our great organization is. And let me just begin by saying that peace is part of Rotary and Rotary International's DNA. We were founded as an organization in Chicago, Illinois in 1905. And as such, peace has been a top priority in Rotary, and it goes back to years before World War I. Anybody here then in that era? Just to check. In 1945, dozens of Rotarians joined with delegates from 50 countries at the Charter Conference of the United Nations. Rotary was at the table. And Rotary has been at the table of many international organizations in the development. And the truth of the matter is our global initiative with polio eradication. We have been strategic partners with the World Health Organization and UNICEF and other United Nations related entities and many others as well. And that's just one of dozens and dozens of different relationships that we have around the world. And it's really important to perhaps understand that type of connectivity that we have. But most of Rotary's work for peace doesn't happen at conferences, even this is a kind of a mini conference in a sense, or in diplomatic circles. It happens through personal relationships that are developed over time across national borders and disparate cultures. Peace and conflict prevention and resolution continues to be one of Rotary's top priorities. As one of our 6 areas of focus, which I think was depicted on one of the graphics earlier. And all of our work at the Rotary Foundation is related to developing the conditions which can enable peaceful societies to flourish. And for centuries, people have looked at peace as the absence of violence, as we heard, military conflict, without fully considering the other drivers that are at play. This can be broadly described in Rotary context. You provided a little different context in it, get to the same end result. We look at this as negative peace. We don't use negative peace in the world of Rotary particularly. We just talk about peace. Either there's peace or there's no peace. We had a president from Japan a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, Tsukuchi Tanaka, and peace, service through peace was his theme. Service through peace. Think about that one, what that means. And peace through service, I should say. Peace through service. And he said, peace is defined by every individual because peace means so many different things to different people. And indeed, we were testing that out and talking with people during our conferences and our travels around the world. And we were finding that there are as many different people as you might ask. There are that many definitions of what peace is. So it's interesting, we're talking positive peace, negative peace potentially. And you even acknowledge we don't use the term negative peace, but peace is still something that, at least in the world of Rotary, and we're an international organization that's been around seemingly forever. We're the oldest service organization in the world. But even we too still are struggling with defining what peace is. And this is one of the reasons that we are so turned on and motivated by this notion and the idea and sound, because you provide metrics that we have been missing, in my opinion. We're turned on by this notion of positive peace. But there is a clear and compelling need to evolve our strategies across all of the challenges that we know we face today. And it's becoming an imperative that with all of the global conflicts and the increasing mounting death toll that we encounter, and I assume some of this will be reflected perhaps in the data that in the index that'll be reported tomorrow at 2 p.m., I understand. And there's no question, if you talk with people who are really paying attention, and it's sad, I don't know about in Australia, but in our country, we have far too many people that just kind of are blasé and ho-hum about what's going on in the world. And I speak specifically about the unsustainable proportions of the kind of refugees that our world is accumulating in virtually every country of consequence, certainly in the developed countries. 65.3 million refugees at last count. And Alistair's data from IEP tells us that the economic impact on violence, or of violence, on the global economy in 2015 was estimated to be 13.6 million, I think he pointed out. Billion. Trillion, with a T, just, you know. These things just kind of, a little bit here, a little bit there. 13.6 trillion. The biggest number that Rotary has been able to reach in terms of our services, funds raised and invested, 4.1 billion. One day we might get a trillion. But that's approximately 11 times the size of the global foreign direct investment, $13.6 trillion. So it's time for new approaches in our look at how we do business in peace. This is coming from our Rotary side of the equation. And new approaches that Rotary can use to help define how we can, in fact, move ahead together in ways that perhaps we had not envisioned, let's just say 3 years ago. We only got acquainted with Steve about 3 years ago. And he helped open our eyes a lot, and I think we helped open his eyes as well in terms of what's feasible and what's possible, particularly if we work together. And we must develop solutions that are based on crafting conditions and that contribute to a peaceful society rather than simply mitigating the causes of war. We have strategic partnerships, and I think that when I say strategic partnerships, let me just reference, because we only had reference to polio, the eradication of polio. Since 1985, Rotary has had as its #1 corporate priority on a global basis to eradicate polio from the face of the earth. In 1985, 1988, in that window, there were 1,000 cases of polio reported every single day around the globe in 125 polio-endemic countries. This last year, 2016, there were 37 cases of polio for the entire year in 3 countries: Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. This year, thus far, there are only 5 cases of polio, the last case of polio on the 20th of February in Afghanistan. We are on the cusp of eradicating one of the most crippling, disastrous diseases that history has ever known. It takes 36 consecutive months with no reported cases of polio for the world to be certified polio-free. How did we get there? Through 1.2 million Rotarians on the ground in nearly 200 countries and territories around the world, working in partnership with the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, UNICEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation joined us in 2007, well towards the tail end, but frankly, they gave us a lift at that point that really made all the difference in the world for us. And most of the national governments of the world, without their support and their ministries of health in many countries, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, in the Congo, you pick the country, we could never have gotten the job done if it hadn't been for the help of the governments. And they have done it both with their in-kind services and also with their financial resources. And there's so much more I can tell you about this, but this is why I wanted to mention it, particularly for non-Rotarians to understand. Rotary International has been the driving force, the Rotary Foundation. We are one and the same, working in partnership. Rotary International, Rotary Foundation. We are all part of one organization. We've been driving this all the way for all these years. And I have to tell you, I'm absolutely convinced that in some context, the issue of peace will be embedded in our next major project, whatever we do once the world is declared polio-free. How that is manifested and how we go about doing that, time will tell. But I just want to give you the strength and the ability of what this organization has been able to accomplish for a whole variety of good reasons. So, this pilot project that we're engaging the Rotary Foundation last April, just last month, as a matter of fact. Is it? Yeah, we're still meeting. Last month, we approved a 2 to 3 year MOU of understanding with IEP to work together. And I won't repeat Alistair's comments of the ways in which we have done that. We've already had 4 or so pilot projects in different parts of the world, already tested, field tested, the most recent one in Mexico that you pointed out. And so we're working to see how can we best work together, how can we better define what our mission is. But what I will say, we have 6 areas of focus that addresses the fundamental root causes, in our opinion, of conflict and the realities of what prevent positive peace, or certainly discourage it, are 6 areas of focus. And I believe that the concept of positive peace, the 6 areas of focus had a subtext for us of peace. And we have been looking at these 6 areas of focus as being what it is that we're about the business of trying to do around the globe, to make a quality difference in the capacity and the economic vitality and the personal and human toll, if you will, and the benefits that occur particularly in the most challenged areas of the world, the most underdeveloped and other areas of greatest need. But what positive peace, the concept, brings to the table is to reverse that with the umbrella of positive peace. And our areas of focus now kind of become the subtext. And this is one of the learnings, in my opinion, my takeaway from this relationship as it's evolved already, which I think is a powerful understanding. And I think others get it real quickly. And that's one of the things that attracts us to this whole concept. So, I think rather than take up time just talking about what you've already repeated, I'll just bypass on all that and say that we'll have a little discussion and I guess ultimately opportunities for questions from the floor. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And can I invite Alistair back up to join you, Paul, on these high stools, and also introduce Ms. Julie Mason to facilitate a little conversation between the two of you. Ms. Julie Mason is former District Governor of District 9800 of Rotary, and is, in her spare time, school principal of a very large college out in the western suburbs of Melbourne. So without further ado, Julie.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. I have to say I feel like I'm surrounded by the presence of greatness here with these 2 fabulous gentlemen. I'll tell you just a quick little bit about me and why I do feel like I'm in the presence of greatness. I am just a mere humble teacher when it's all said and done. But I am a principal of a college out in the West Bay, Pera College. We have in our college 61 different language groups, students from 50 different countries. So it's very much a diverse, multicultural group of people in our college. We, for the last 15 years, initiated a program of peer mediation with our young people, taking on the role of peer mediators. We are our lead school at the moment in the Respectful Relationships program that's being delivered by our education department and funded by our government. We were a pilot school in a program called Intercultural Understanding, and we practice restorative justice principles whenever we're working with our young people to convince them that there's a better, more peaceful way to achieve what it is they want. And last Friday, we celebrated a pretty special day. We called it Celebrating Our Diversity. And I'm wearing an orange wristband that says that our diversity is our strength as an educational institution. And this was funded by our local Rotary Club, the Rotary Club of Wyndham. So professionally, I'm right at the heart of what it is that we're really talking about now. And I believe education, of course, is such a key factor in all the things that we've talked about. I work closely with our local government, so I was, when I was reading your CV, I was thinking yes, because it's so important for education and local government to be connected. And I joined Rotary 23 years ago, because I think it's also important, if you want something done, I've written down here, go join Rotary for those people who haven't thought of that yet. If you want something done, join Rotary. For me, after reading some of the work that I hadn't read before, Alistair, I have to admit, I've been living it, but not getting the theory, not getting the data, not really understanding the potential that I sense is there through our Rotary Foundation. I really have a passion for what it is that we can achieve with young children, 5-year-olds, because they are our future. And if we can get it right with them, in terms of peaceful solutions and peaceful understandings, then we won't be sitting here in 20 years' time talking about the things we're talking about now. And when I saw Goal 16, building peace, justice and strong institutions, my heart and head was saying, Baden Powell College are going to be living that even more so. So that's where I sit in this whole reason for sitting up here. So now these gentlemen are going to have some hard-hitting questions. Probably from you, not from me. I said to them they're safe questions. But we're just going to take a moment to pose a couple of questions to them. So for Alistair, I was sort of, in my preference, I was saying, in reading, I did read around all about things like virtuous cycles of peace, conditions for peace, peace-centred techniques, pillars and factors of positive peace. And I was inspired by that. And not only have I read the short version, I've read the long version as well. And I will be there at 2 p.m. tomorrow to see what else I need to know. And so I said to myself, well, with all of this going on, what really is preventing peace in our world? I thought that was a pretty simple question to start off with, Alistair. So what do you think, Alistair? All of that, what really is preventing peace in our world?
This is as close as I get to a beauty contest, isn't it? Profess a longing for world peace. A couple of, I think, one thing is, I think we've often thought about this in sort of binary versions of the beauty contest. Oh, if only there was just world peace everywhere, and oh no, the world's going to hell. You know, look at Syria, and there are extraordinary things such as the 65 million people forcibly displaced. But there's a lot happening within that. So having said that, you know, half the world has improved in peace over the last 10 years, and half has declined. So we're seeing a sort of gulf, almost, an inequality of peace. So I think we need to look down at a more granular level and measure it and understand what's driving it in each place. And that's down to the city block as well as globally. And no doubt, you know, people had similar thoughts back 30 years ago when Rotary proposed to eliminate polio, and at that point there'd only ever been one disease eliminated, smallpox, I imagine, and people, I'm sure, told you it can't be done and stopped thinking of those things, but the way you went about it, meticulously, you know, going district to district and making sure you're mapping it all out. And I've looked at a lot of the polio cards that are generated in these different districts and how it's all done, and it's done scientifically. And I think we need that sort of approach for peace as well, and to take it seriously.
Couldn't agree more, couldn't agree more. So, for Paul now, I was super excited when I read a little bit that you provided in terms of the action that's being taken for education for peace and peace centres, and super excited about the work that Rotary Foundation is looking at in terms of it. I know that Paul is aware of, we're particularly proud in our district about our unbroken record for establishing peace fellows each year. How many peace fellows are in the room here today, by the way? Okay. Would you like to just look hard at them, because they are also the futures of driving what it is that you want to see right down here on the ground level. And I know how much money you're capable of raising, and I know how much money now you're capable of raising, so I think you guys are going to be our best friends in the future as we move forward with this initiative. But in thinking about the pilot, Paul, what will it actually take for it to be successful, and how important is it that the funds are there?
How important? Very important. And what is important? Patience, perseverance, and passion, and probably beginning with passion for what the issue is that we need to address. And I think that it will be absolutely imperative that we get Rotarians on the ground, around the world, involved in what we have to lay out a plan and understand we have the basis of it now, but the positive peace element is something that is new to us, and we have a pretty significant education job that needs to be done to help get everybody on the same page and to get some infrastructure in place that would support this. And then begin the process to engage Rotarians around the world. And it's an evolutionary kind of a thing, and it's going to take a few years for that to happen, I think. And it's going to be important that we have donors who become investors in this. One of the keys to Rotary's success is twofold. You can get your hands dirty and get out and do the work and be on the ground out wherever it is in the world where the work is that needs to be done. Whether it's building water wells or you pick the topic and the issue. But we need to supplement with that with the financial resources. And when we have the financial resources, that provides investors who then in turn become advocates, who then in turn become people that will then help to become engaged and involve other people. And this is kind of a word of mouth, a little chain and network of building the relationship. And so the funding will be absolutely imperative to support our effort. And the question is, we have not yet defined, if this was part of your question, how much money do we need and how we're going to go about doing it. The going about doing it, we know what needs to be done. It's a matter of defining what it is that we need. Is this me or is this the system? I think this is. Okay. Am I off now or is my time up? Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay? I just raised my voice? Okay. And the thing that, the concept of power, of positive peace in the presentation that was made is that we now have some metrics that we can look at. The key to the success of polio eradication that has been an imperative is that we have a measurable outcome. And we can measure every week, every month, every year what our progress is towards an end goal. And frankly, you made it very clear, Alistair, in your presentation, that getting our arms around the issue of peace probably will never be as neat and clean as it has been for the eradication of polio, for the obvious reasons. And therefore, we're going to need to define what our metrics and measurements of success are. And that will be as important to engaging and maintaining the engagement of Rotarians and non-Rotarians, frankly. It's not a Rotarian issue. This is going to be a much broader issue on that. And then it's going to be important in order to raise the funds and to have the credibility of the delivery of what's the end product and how can we tell that story too.
I couldn't agree more. I just wonder, before we move on to the last question and you get your turn, can you elaborate a little bit more? As a throwaway line, I marched up to Alistair and said, in 3 years I'm retiring, and you've got me now for what you were talking about in terms of education. Can you elaborate a little bit more on, you said to me, gosh, we're working with a lot of schools at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks and sounds like?
Sure. So, I mean, traditionally, it's been about us providing particularly data visualization and sort of web-based tools we've had that kids like to play around with. You mentioned 5-year-olds of the future. Well, we've got, for instance, a partnership with Esri, which is the world's largest data mapping organisation, where they provide our maps into schools, and I'm sure even 5-year-olds, not really targeted 5-year-olds, can play around with that and get a more tangible sense of peace in different countries and really get into it. So that's been it historically, but now what we've been moving towards with the Peace Fellows and now with a deep partnership with Rotary is seeing how we can enable people to act within their own community to spark this virtuous cycle of peace. And with important funds from Rotary and others, but perhaps less than you would think, as I say, converting this cost of violence into a way to fund a cycle of peace locally. So much can be done with a small amount of money. Is really one of the great investments. When you look at I think investment in education is marvellous, but you know, when you talk of that economic model, it takes 20 years to sort of pay back, and pay back handsomely it does, but you know, you can often get these programs paid back within the same year.
Absolutely, absolutely. Within a week sometimes.
Within a week.
If you get it right, within a week. All right, now to finish off with, we've talked a lot about peace, 2 words here. We've talked a lot about peace, but there's also the other word, profits, that seem to run across, if you will, some of the challenges to achieving what we want to achieve. So my question was, can we really, really put peace before profits? And if we can, and we have to say we can, where do we start and how do we know that we'll be successful?
How do you define profits in the question? Because that can be taken in many, many different ways, I think. Again, maybe like the definition of peace. You know, how do you define what peace is in that respect? Profits in the context of what?
Probably in the context of countries where corruption is not quite as minimal as it should be. And it seems that in some of those, well, from my experience, in one particular country, making money is more important than what it is spending time.
So corporate profits, in a sense, is what we're talking about directly. Okay.
Well, if you asked me that 100 years ago, I would have said yes, it's important that we did put peace before the profits that you can make out of violence and war. But no one's really made any money out of war in time recently, and so part of what we do as an institute is get people to realise the enormous cost that comes with violence and how much of the saving and profit they can realise and achieve through going through a more peaceful version. I was even talking to someone who, a lecturer who often lectures in Doha in northern Iraq, and spreads this message to people there who sort of try and suppress their communities, thinking that is how they can retain control and get the most money. But this cycle of peace, there's opportunities for everyone, including the people in leadership, to make more money if they follow this route. This is now so expensive to try and live by violence or to allow violence to continue that you're shooting yourself and everyone else in the foot. So to be able to convert this cost into opportunity is significant. And one example of a Rotarian doing this is Al Judith, who in Portland, in the US, without any money, he could see that there was a problem, a cost of violence in Portland, and was speaking to the police chief about that, and found what he needed was some more what are called interrupters. They are people who go into gang situations, who are ex-gang members themselves, and take a public health approach who just don't shoot today. Often they hang out in hospitals after someone's been shot and talk to the gang who assembles there and plans their attack to retaliation. Don't do it today. I did it, I went to jail for 5 years. And these programs, they run in 28 cities across the states, and they're spreading to other cities around the world, can demonstrate how they, not only reduce violent injury by up to 70%, but for every $1 of that program saves the government $2 on hospital bills, on police costs. And so he was able to then go to the mayor and say, the police chief really needs 5 more interrupters, and this will save you twice as much money than it will cost you. So that sort of approach, without even needing funds up front invested, is how trying to bring in a bit of a profit-driven approach. And when you look at likes of Chicago, which is got I think a $10 billion annual deficit, so is cutting their violence reduction programs to save money, even though that then drives up their costs. Trying to get them to see the profits of reducing violence is part of the solution.
Often in Rotary, we feel like we're a hidden gem at times, and we talk about telling the Rotary story. Now, I sat there and watched all your slides and all the data, which is very important, but when you tell the story behind, the data, it gives us a definite idea for the way forward. I think that's really powerful too, so thank you. I know it's not a story, but thank you for telling that part of it. Now, what about you, Paul? What are your thoughts on
Well, I raised the question, if it's a simple question of is it desirable to have, I guess one way to look at it, would peace enhance the profitability of business enterprises around the world? And the answer is obvious. Yes, it would be. Another way to look at it is negative peace a desirable benchmark to allow for profitability of corporations that thrive on negative peace, environments where we have conflict and arms and all the kinds of things that are implied with that? No, that's not at all desirable. Should we regulate that, from a governmental standpoint? Well, I'm not so sure. But I do think that the concept is that we know that if the root causes that lead ultimately to conflict and the difficulties in the ability of individuals to be able to achieve their fullest potential, whether it be through their health, through their living conditions, through their education and ability to go out and to make an honest living when they become adults and productive adults in society that understands in a democratic environment where they can share and see that there's a good, strong government, that we can continue to work in many ways without regard or worry about the profitable side on the other end. Because if we can focus our time and efforts through volunteer effort, we will create a better society in individual communities, which lead to better living conditions and life in countries, which lead by definition to greater profitability. And the greater the quality of life in a particular community or in a nation, let's say, the less they have to spend on the consequences of conflict and war and other things like that, which allows them to divert resources significantly from either security or fighting a war and so forth into human needs within their community. So there's a cycle that I think we can talk about and put into play, that there are rewards in the area of profits significantly if we work at peace, but peace in and of itself only comes about when we get to the ground level of the quality of life and the things that positive peace talk about in any given community or in any given country.
Okay, well thank you very much. I feel like I've learned something today that's going to take me forward. I hope everyone else has, and I know you're going to get a chance for questions now, so I might go because I'm not going to answer any of them.
Actually, Julie, if I may, you're welcome to stay, please. I think we actually have three. I think we have three peace builders here on the stool, so there may be a few questions coming your way, Julie.
Now, Jonathan, I'm not getting paid for this part.
There's free water. So this is your opportunity really to ask any questions that you have. I found both presentations wonderfully provocative, both in the academic and in the personal sense, and in a way a personal challenge as well. But I won't bore you with my ideas. Questions? We have two roving mics. Please just put up your hand. Please stand up, state your name and where you're from, and then your question for the panel, please.
My name is Mike Zafiropoulos, and I'm involved in a voluntary organisation called Australians for Peace over the last 3 or 4 years, basically to celebrate the United Nations International Day of Peace on the 21st of September. Now, whilst we've been relatively successful, we have faced with a lot of challenges, and in particular, because of the lack of definitive meaning of the word peace, we've been unable to make peace a popular concept. So the passion exists, but we haven't been able to engage with local governments, even Rotary. We've approached Rotary without the success that we expected. So I'd like to congratulate Rotary at the international level for collaborating, because I think without collaboration with the Institute, we're not going to see this very complex global issue resolved in some way or another. I'm familiar with war and peace because my ancestors, I come from a Greek background, and the Persians and the Greeks have been fighting for years and years, many, many thousands of years ago. So The question that I'd like to ask the panel is, how do we make peace popular, which is the thing that we've adopted, and also how do we bring it down to the individual, because ultimately it is the individual which will make the difference and change communities and nations and the globe. And more specifically for me, as I'm a councillor in local government like you, I'd like to know how can we engage local government. The Institute hasn't done much in relation to local government, and the local government is that level of government that is at the grassroots and can really make a change. How do we make a priority of this? Sorry.
Thank you. There's a lot of great questions.
Yeah, if I may, I'll just start out real quickly, and then I'm sure Alistair and Julie may have, certainly will have ideas on this. But, you know, I go back to the notion of peace, and this may be overly simplistic, but the reality is you're dealing with a mass population that sometimes doesn't stay very focused on a particular issue. Peace is a motherhood apple pie kind of a thought, an impression, in my opinion. And it'd be like, how do we make everybody happy? And how do we sustain happiness? You know, isn't that another way in which we get to peace, if everybody is happy and feels good? Doesn't that create a sense of peace? What makes that happen? The point I'm leading up to is it's not an immediate solution, and it's something that's got to be long-term, and it's very complex, as we've seen in the presentations. We all know that. If peace could be easily have resolved, then from the beginning of time, in terms of humankind, perhaps there would have been a solution, and peace would have been there forever, but it's not. And it's something that we're at least tackling it in I think, a thoughtful, contextual way that potentially will impact to a degree. But each new generation comes along, and they kind of bring their own ethos and their own culture, and so their definition of some of the same things that our generation says, well, this is what peace is really all about, they may not see it that way. So that's part of the problem. But in terms of the other question that you asked about how do we get it to the grassroots, to the local municipal governments, if you will, in our country, I'm not sure if that's called municipal governments here in Australia, but in Canada, the United States, and in some other places around the world, for a number of years we've had be a peace builder city. And there's a set of protocols that are proposed in a resolution that a council or the governing body of the municipal entity would adopt, and it would have certain principles that they would adopt, and they're not dissimilar from what we talk about in the broad spectrum of the positive peace, that a council would adopt, and then they work maybe on exchange programs and other kinds of things that would help to facilitate. So there are initiatives that are in place and quite effective in terms of engaging, but again, it's somewhat transitory because this whole idea of peace is so elusive and subject to preemption at a given moment for a whole variety of reasons. But at least it's attempting to address the question as you posed it in that regard.
Yeah. Look, I think you're right about clarity, and peace has too often been very fluffy, and when it's fluffy and people aren't clear about the goals and how to get there, then they come up with poor projects. And if anyone else suggests to me that something they can do for peace is to plant a tree, or hold hands and just have a vigil, then I'm going to scream. But the Rotary is not like that. The Rotary Showcase website lists over 1,200 peace projects that they're involved in. And I spent a weekend actually pouring through it. It's meant to be an hour, but it's got so into it. And you're right, we haven't, the Institute, done much at the local government level. We are trying to get there. We spent the first 10 years trying to convince the world that peace was measurable globally, and now we're trying to come down. So I think the critical change is this SDG 16, which is very clear. It applies to every country on Earth, to every community at every level, even down to your street, in effect, as to what's to be done, track it, show who's doing what. It'd be much like, I think, the climate change movement has, the journey they've been on over the last 30 years. Get clear, get passionate, and really get stuck in and make it the big deal that it is.
Next question. How about one from the back? Gentleman with the
Scott.
Hi, my name's Robert McWork. I'm a Rotarian, but I'm also chair of YHA Youth Hostels in Australia. Questions for Alistair. I was just wondering, to what extent do you include tourism numbers and or tourism movements in the Global Peace Index in terms of the more people feel safe, obviously, the more they would be inclined to travel?
Yes. Good question. We don't include it in the 23 indicators of the Global Peace Index, but we do have a partnership with the World Tourism and Travel Council. So we've done research for them about the impact of travel on peace and how tourism travel can generate peace, and also how peace can help to grow travel. So if you go to the WTTC website, there's some of our research there. We would like to do more, speaking to a range of travel and tourist operators around the world to try and interest them in being able to do more in that space. So if YHA is interested, let's talk.
Lady in the third row.
Hi, thank you all so much for your presentation. I have a question regarding a lot of the discussions about the GPI and the Positive Peace Index. In my mind, the Global Peace Index takes a bit more of a state-level approach to the causes of instability that perpetuate violence and negative peace, if you will, whereas Positive Peace has a more of a, includes a much larger range of actors, I guess, in formulating this idea of peace. So my question is, I'm someone who does a lot of this kind of grassroots interfaith and peace-building work, so when we have conversations around peace, it is very much in a kumbaya type sense. Getting people of different values to hold hands is not something necessarily to be dismissed, especially when, depending on who you're speaking to, individuals perpetuate negative peace. But when you speak to other people, it's nation-states who perpetuate negative peace. So in a lot of your work, Alistair, and for both of you, all three of you, if you would, I mean, this might be a hard question to answer, but who is more responsible for perpetuating negative peace or promoting positive peace if you're having a conversation about individuals, or is it nation-states? If you just had to put it out there, who can have the biggest impact?
Sure. It operates at all levels, and the systems approach looks at systems. And I mean, the easiest to define systems are where you have a government authority, so local government, or even a lower community level than that, through to a national, and they each affect the other, and dynamics in one can affect, while having pointed out that there are wild differences within a nation state. So I think the answer is it depends, and some things have worked and individuals have made an enormous difference. Others, times an individual has made a difference sort of as a tipping point after a whole lot of stuff, and it couldn't quite be seen as to exactly when that tipping point would be achieved, and the whole system changes at different levels. Just on the holding hands, I was a bit flippant on that. It's when people just hold hand once and think they've ticked that box of peace. So, but we do. Interesting, one of the recent positive peace workshops we did was with Libyans, getting them together, groups who have been sort of fighting, and they say they would never have spoken to each other in these rival groups. And with a positive peace framework, which gets them not to look at the violence, but to look at other things, means that they could sit together and talk, and then gave them a platform to then later be able to address the actual direct causes of violence. So it's an important reconciliation tool as well.
And for me, it's one day at a time, one dispute at a time between, children, and sometimes it is it's culturally based, and it's not their words, it's the words of the history of the family, etc. So it really is about creating win-win situations. It's about listening to one another. It's about articulating what it is that would make them feel safe and be able to move on. So in one sense, that's very grassroots level. But I would say as an educator, if we're all doing that over and over and over and over again, we're going to be creating those conditions that you need. I was interested too in looking at some of the conditions that were necessary in terms of positive peace. And there's no doubt that poverty is a factor in education for mitigating factor for creating the best resources, and poverty at a level in terms of school, what you can have in terms of developing resources, but also for families. So I was looking at some of the factors there and saying, well, where might they sit within an educational institution? No doubt a well-functioning government of a school, is important. So you can relate a lot of this to what I do on a daily basis. But certainly for me, it's one day at a time, one group at a time, and getting the outcome that's going to be there that's a better way forward for the people involved. And they're often the younger people.
Questions? Gentleman in the great jacket.
I'm Zakaria Siddiqui. I work with ANU as a research assistant. I have experienced in my childhood and other places also that there are situations when people accept their second-class citizenship and they want to live in peace because and I was always interested in measuring something like what Dr. Martin Luther King called as obnoxious peace, or in Keynes's language, Carthaginic peace. So, for example, a person from different race or different religion gets into an institution, and then the whole group lynches him, and to safeguard his life, actually administration takes him out of the college, and then the peace prevails. So can we do some measurements? Because there are many societies which we know are under tremendous amount of stress. So is there a way to measure that kind of stress? For example, in India we have scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and Muslims who live like second-class citizens. Probably in other countries, in African countries, there are tribal conflicts. So a powerful tribe rules over in a way that does not allow all the human faculties to flourish equally for every individual. So idea of positive peace is very good, but it does not tell us where the stress is. If we can measure something like this, for example, let us say that in scheduled caste, scheduled tribe groups, the average height of a female is systematically lower than average height of a female in upper caste Hindus in India. Can't we take that as a measure of some sort of stress in the society that we live in? Or a standard amount of education or years of schooling that accrues to a privileged class compared to an underprivileged class? Can we take that as a measure of stress in the society, or measure of Carthaginic peace, you can say, even though society can be effectively peaceful, but it does not work?
Yeah, thank you. Look, that is, I know when you've got 23 indicators, some appear to be varied, but that is a significant subset of indicators in both the Global Peace Index and the Positive Peace Index. So you look at instability is one, and for instance we saw recently in America the growing tensions and polarity between different groups and ethnic tensions. That shows up in their scores, and we know the drag that then has on the community as a whole. We see the same things on gender lines, on ethnic lines in other countries and communities. So that is a very important element of not only looking at what is actual peace, because it's not just levels of homicide. If you are suppressed, then there's often fewer cases of violent crime, but there's other forms of violence. And that is, a decrease of peace. but then also with positive peace, you are not going to grow and be able to sustain peace unless you are increasing your acceptance of the rights of all groups within that. And we gather data sets that look at that consistently across all countries and try and raise awareness about the importance of it.
May I, can I just add another example or a situation here? You raise a very powerful question, the implication of it, and this is an issue that Rotary has a very difficult time getting its arms around for perhaps obvious reasons, the complexity of how you deal with some of the implications. And you're only citing just a pinprick of all of the parallel issues that exist in, you take whatever the country might be, or the segment of the country. One way in which Rotary addresses this, one case at a time, if you will. We have I didn't mention it, it was sort of a pilot program. They titled it Pushing for Peace. And this is just to give you an illustration. And I'm not sure that this is the cure-all, but it tells you one way in which we can tackle this problem if we can have it happen in enough places. Pushing for Peace, and it's we have a Rotarian Action Group, which is Peace and Conflict Resolution, which is supporting very much the IEP program and partnering with it. But and they are dealing with, in this particular area, India. It's a case in point. Water and sanitation as the area of focus that they're addressing. And they provided, in this program, they provided an advocacy and hygiene training for waste pickers in Pune, India, which I was there last February. I didn't see the program, that program, but I saw some other things they're doing, which is quite remarkable in India. As well as creating awareness campaigns surrounding the importance of waste removal in the community and the stigma that is affixed to that on the members of society that engage in that particular kind of work. And you could take that example and multiply it probably hundreds of times in the culture, maybe more than that, I don't know, maybe not. You're shaking your head, so I don't know if this is missing the point or not. But the point is that the process that they went through, at least in terms of the preliminary evaluation on it, was that there were positive, favorable results. Now, there are systemic issues culturally within perhaps the country that transcend little simple fixes like this, if you will, or attempts to address it. But that's the way Rotary learns. What do we learn from this experience? And I don't know the answer to that question. But it's an effort, good faith effort, to see an issue and in this particular case, just targeting one profession, if you will, that in many other countries of the world are equal to any other position that one might have. So I just use that as an example of how it might be addressed. I'd be interested in your reaction to that. If you're...
Let's do that.
I know that's not what you're asking, Jonathan, but...
Given the hour, how about we take all the questions that are remaining, throw them at the panel, they can choose to respond as they see fit, and take that as your opportunity for any final thoughts as well. So, if we could, just the gentleman here. Robert.
Rob Helm, I'm a Rotarian. My question's to Alistair. I enjoyed the presentation, it raises lots of questions, particularly the scatter plots, which are very broad and don't explain much of the variance. A lot of questions arise from that. The one I raise first is the effect of population density on all that data set, at macro and micro levels. Another one would be potable water. I suspect some would turn out to be more important than others.
The gentleman in the next row.
Hi, my name is Narkazovichin. I just started my PhD here at RMIT at the Global Urban and Social Studies School. I was in the past 4 years living and working in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And there, what I did, apart from working at the university there as a senior assistant, I started to coordinate summer schools that are independent from like government-based schooling type. So and then I realized in the past 4 years working and coordinating those kinds of summer schools, and that deal with, the summer school is called Learning from the Past, and it deals with dealing with the past issues, transitional justice and reconciliation. War in Bosnia ended 22 years ago, but still it struggles a lot with maintaining peace and kind of moving beyond it. And then I realized in the 4 years working and living there that there are many, like quite a few initiatives like this, be it in the form of workshops or peace camps or summer schools. And the reason for this probably is because the government itself is not really supporting it directly through an official governmental program. And it even supports dividing schools, where we have 2 schools under one roof with different curricula being taught in the schools. So this is a big problem, and so we have a rise of those educational initiatives. And I wanted to ask whether those, because you mentioned you're setting up a positive peace academy, and that you educate or train people that can then further educate their societies. So could you tell us more about this academy maybe that you're trying to set up and how this will look like?
Thank you. And the lady just behind you, Thank you.
Hello, my name is Diletta, and I study Master of International Development here at RMIT. Earlier, Mr. Netzel mentioned that peaceful society is one where people are happy and are able to live out their human capacities, education, through healthcare, participate in the economy. I'd like to know if the Global Peace Index identifies those high-earning industries in the world that take away from these people's capacities, and would you accept their philanthropy?
All right, thank you. And there was a lady right up the back, and then,
Thank you. Thank you very much for this talk today. I find it very affirming. My name is Margaret Hepworth. I'm with the Gandhi Experiment. We run programs in schools, Julie. We teach non-violence as a choice. We teach conflict management, forgiveness, secular forgiveness, and something called almost impossible thoughts. When you say you're seeking something new, I think we actually are teaching that now in schools. We measure through an attitudinal shift, which I think underpins everything you're talking about. We bring it right down here. But what I'd be interested in is 2 things. One, we come under the banner of positive education and mindful action. So are you partnering with groups in the positive education field? I'd be really, really interested to know. And one thing I thought I would let you know, that as I go into schools, working with young people, there's a common theme that runs. Schools across Melbourne, I've run this program across India, into Pakistan, Indonesia. Everywhere I go, I ask them, why do we know more about the bad stuff and not enough about the good stuff? And all those young people tell me it's the media. Now that probably isn't something that has been raised today, but I'd be really curious to know whether the media comes into, the concept of positive peace. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the final question, we've got 2. Okay. Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Brendan. I study social work in Assoc here. I'm a therapeutic residential carer for kids in state care. I'm very curious to hear from all of you. I guess when we've discussed peace nationally, it seems to ignore the huge historical definitions, I guess, which peace has meant for Indigenous Australians here. I guess specifically, since this country has been invaded, many people would say that no, we're still not in a peaceful state, given that we can't acknowledge that we're on stolen lands and that we're returning or addressing the fact that many of our institutions and systems and us and our identities are products of, I guess, this violence and dispossession. Do you ever think that a definition of peace could include acknowledging First Nations peoples, not only in Australia, but also America, Canada, and other settler colonial states?
Thank you. And final question from the gentleman with the great scarf. Just there, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Bullen. I'm Australian South Sudanese, so I've been here for 13 years. The presentation is very great. I work for Victoria Police. I came with my work colleagues that are here. I got a very specific question. As you know, South Sudan is the youngest nation in the world. We have been fighting for the last 49 years among ourselves, as you clearly put. There's a war within Sudan, and then we got our independence in 2011, and South Sudanese are fighting themselves. So, and the fighting that is going on home, as well as our attitudes here, that they are all affecting us, both in our home country, as well as here, both in America, in Australia, because you see this negative media report is all about us. And given your job, do you guys actually have a target for specific people that, yeah, everyone is the same, but given our country is the youngest country on the world, and we are exposed to different way of living, different system, and all these kind of things, which we don't experience back home, but we came here, system of law, way of living, how things are done is really different, and we are struggling. What is the specific job that you have actually put in here, in particular in Australia, so that we live in peace, so that people don't have a perception that if they see a tall black person like me, yep, he's the guy that went and stole the thing in the store. What is the job that you guys are actually putting in to help us to get out of this problem, so that we live in peace and we felt that we are part of this community?
Thank you, thank you. So we've gone around the world quite literally with those questions, which is just fantastic. So some brief final thoughts from you all, if you will, and please respond to any questions you wish.
To the one question about the media in the United States, we say if it bleeds, it leads, and if it bleeds, it leads. And the message is that the population is really only interested in the gore, the kinds of stories that are, you know, of that nature. And I think the data of their viewerships or readership in the print media would support that. So is there an answer to that? Well, it has to be dealt with by people responding by not subscribing to those means of media outlets that would provide that type of coverage, but I don't know the answer to it because it's been talked about for decades in our country. I don't know, ties totally to this issue of the indigenous population in Australia, but I know that the Rotary Club of Melbourne and actually a number of the Rotary clubs in Victoria State and even on a wider basis throughout the country of Australia are working on an End Trachoma endemic initiative in the Indigenous community. And I know in Canada, in the Indigenous community in Canada, the Rotarians there are working very diligently in a variety of areas of need. And the reason it's significant to just identify the fact that there is one particular initiative that they're focusing on, in this case in Australia, trachoma. It opens the door to developing a relationship with the community or with the constituency, and then to come in and to look at other ways in which, in this case, Rotarians on the ground can work with the Indigenous population in Australia to assist in other areas of need that they might have. And so that's one of the ways in which Rotary goes about doing its business. It does it in different ways.
So for me, you link up with your local closest Rotary group. And if you can't find that, stand up, all the Rotarians in the room, please. Stand up. Have a good look around at them. Okay? They are representative of Rotary in action all around this state, really. And so that's where you go. Go first of all and seek out, because we've proven over 30 years that Rotarians, arms and legs, heart and soul and head around a problem like polio. Now we can do it with anything we set our mind to. and it does happen in your school, in your community, you know, and Rotary is the heart and soul in those communities. So you reach out for Rotary. Walk away with that, reach out for Rotary, because we're there to help.
Thank you. And as we turn to Alistair's final thoughts, I should say the three panellists will be outside to, you know, to engage as well in conversation as well. So, Alistair, some final thoughts.
All right. I'd like to have a stab at each of the questions, but I'm not sure my memory will allow that. So please remind me if I stop talking as to which questions I've missed. Okay. South Sudan, we would really like to be involved in some of this work in South Sudan. We did it recently in Libya. We're talking to a range of groups, sorry, in Uganda, a little closer to South Sudan. And we're trying to set something up in South Sudan. I've done explosive weapons reduction programs in South Sudan in previous jobs, and it is something of a passion and dearly needed, so we'd like to work with you. Indigenous rights are an important issue in the Peace Index and the global, the Positive Peace Index. It comes in various indicators, particularly things like acceptance of the rights of others, reducing inequality. So it is an important issue, and if there's any other indicators or way of dealing with it, we always like to review and improve. On the media, I guess we find out tomorrow at 2 p.m. whether. So last year there was a deterioration of 0.28% in peace, and we got media reach of 1.7 billion people. If there's an improvement tomorrow, what will the media reach be? But it is traditionally the thing. We find that with our products, and you know, we can't get much media on positive peace generally. It doesn't have the blood that the Peace Index and the Global Terrorism Index have. So I think it's about making it clearer, making it more powerful, getting a groundswell of people in it, and the stories follow the people as well. There's a question on population density and potable water. They are important issues. Population density per se doesn't feature as much in the data in terms of being a significant driver of violence, but population pressure does. So we are seeing even a lot of cities that are growing rapidly, they are reducing homicides and other violent crime. That's happening in most regions of the world. In certain pockets of Latin America, it's increasing, and that is in part related to increasing population density. And same, I think, on potable water is particularly where there is growing scarcity that is fueling a lot of violence. People refer to Darfur as being the first climate change war because of water access being a big issue. So I think that in the future will grow and become an enormous issue. So I'm very glad that Rotary is doing such good work on water. What have I missed? About the schools program, that sounds excellent. A large part of what we do is provide our content, try and chop it up into different videos and in different formats that people can use as part of their training, and if there's anything you would like us to incorporate in what we offer to others, we'd be delighted to discuss. And did I miss your question, sir? Can you remind me what it was?
The Peace Academy.
Oh, the Peace Academy. Oh, there, what a way to finish. Yes, well, we launched in the next couple of months. We're just piloting some training videos at the moment. This is primarily an online tool, but as I say, we provide content to others to give into classrooms and into university courses. I believe we're already part of several thousand university courses that our content's used. So it'll take many different forms, but the central one that I think most Rotarians will access will be through an online portal, and it will connect with Rotarian programs and will make sense to Rotarians. And there will be versions that are for a non-Rotarian crowd that speak to where they are, and we would like to, over time, as we get more resources to further develop it, localise it more, obviously put it in as many languages as possible, and use as much local content and voice as possible. So over time, it'll grow. But yeah, we'll send out messages as to when each version is available.
Thank you very much. Could I invite Pera Wells up to thank our guests on our behalf?
it gives me great pleasure indeed to thank Alistair, Julie, and Paul, and Jonathan for enabling us to come together today and learn about positive peace. This is the first meeting in Australia where people have come together to think about positive peace together. It came to me when I was in a conversation with Steve in about February that I learned that the goal of the strategic partnership between Institute of Economic and Peace and Rotary is to see 1 million people all over the world informed about and devoted to promoting the concept of positive peace. So in thanking our speakers, I'd like to thank you all for coming and to inspire you to perhaps when you next send an email to someone overseas and say, look, I've just been to a conference on positive peace and here's a link to it. Keep an eye on this. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. So as Pera distributes the alcohol, a small token of our appreciation to each of you, thank you. I also want to thank Pera. Pera was really the visionary and the driving force behind this event, and hopefully the first of many types of conversations that we can have around the work of both these organisations. I do, if you please indulge me for 2 more minutes, I just want to thank you all. I want to thank Nikki Maxinos, admin and support officer extraordinaire who's helped put today together. I want to thank Elaine Prattley, Rotary World Peace Fellow, for helping out with the Q&A. I also want to thank the Graduate School of Business and Law and the School of Global, Urban and Social Studies for also helping fund the event. Obviously, the Rotary Foundation and the Institute for Economics and Peace. The wonderful organising committee, Pera Wells, Charlie Allen, Tanya Miletic and Bob Fells, thank you all. And as we close this part, the formal proceedings of the morning, and continue, I promise, the conversation over some very nice food and drink, supplied, by the way, by the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre Catering. We thought that was apt. Just next door. Welcome to Linga. Please let me, if I may, close again with the UN Secretary General's words. Peace must be our goal and our guide. All that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us. So, on that note, thank you all for coming along and for committing for peace today and every day. Thank you.
I'm glad I'm introducing the positivity events with I don't know what makes sense, well, yeah, I mean, stage where I've almost given up, because I'm used to doing it, I'm doing it, and I have to do it. You've got to have the right to give that to me.